Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on terrain tools for site design. My name is Erin. I'm your resident webinar host here at Softtree, and with me is our training manager, Matthew Dickey. So today we are going to be diving into the terrain module in a fair bit of depth, covering different tools that you can use for site design. So today, really breaking it down into sort of four larger categories, or I should say mini demonstrations. The first of which is going to focus on that essential first step for any site design project, which is creating a topo surface of your original ground. So we'll step through and take a look at that. From there, we'll move into demonstrating the creation of a simple site design surface. Then following that, the creation of a more complicated site design surface, and then finally wrapping up with the exploration of just a few additional tools that are available within the terrain module to help you. Of course, a bit of housekeeping to get us started. Today's webinar, obviously it's being recorded. This will be available on our YouTube channel following the webinar sometime in the next 24 hours. As well, for all of you here in the live version of the webinar, please do engage with us, ask questions. We're happy to tackle some of those at the end. And I guess this is a new disclaimer I should be adding to all of our webinars. We're likely going to go over time. So apologies that we booked 45 minutes. We tend to go over a little bit, given our track record. So with that, let's get into it. So I just wanted to highlight that although today we're focusing on just two examples, the application of the site design workflow that we're going to focus on really can be applied to lots of different things, whether that's a simple quarry design, residential site grading, a wetland design, ponds, pads, and those could be forestry landings or wind farm turbine sites, as well as things like landfill design. So the tools and the workflows that we're going to focus on today have a lot of application elsewhere and to a wide variety of project types. And as I was saying, there is a typical workflow for these projects. So for site design, first off, we're in the terrain module. The very first step is importing your survey data and creating a digital terrain model for that original ground surface. So this is terrain file number 1. Then in a second terrain file, this is where we're going to create our design surface. So we do this intentionally, 2 different terrain files, but in that second terrain file, we include that original ground surface in the background. So the reason we do that is it then allows us to do things like calculate volumes, understand how that site design is going to interact with the surrounding terrain. And then from there, we've got a whole bunch of other options, whether it's outputting the file, exporting it, or potentially even continuing over to the location module where we can do further work or adding other elements to it in the case of, linear elements, I should say. So reiterating that point today, if you've got road ends, you've got a bunch of modules. We're playing in the terrain module for site design. If you just have terrain tools, that's okay too. It is a standalone module available. And as I mentioned, terrain site design can be integrated with the location module design. And here we've got, I'm going to say on the more complicated side of site design things, a dam and spillway project, but integrating your site design with that sort of road or corridor design is really applicable in a whole bunch of cases, whether that's wind farms where you've got the pads and you've got them connecting to the road network, forestry landings connecting again those key landing sites to the road network, or other items like a pit with a ramp coming out of it. We would bring that over into the location module to handle the ramp. So with my, again, rather wordy introduction, I'm going to pass it over to Matt. We're going to take a look at our first step, which really is creating that original ground terrain model. So importing our survey data, creating that terrain model, and then we'll get into the fun stuff of site design. So Matt, I'm going to pass it over to you.
All right. So I'll, as per our usual webinar workflow, I'm going to start out by opening up an empty terrain file. And here I'm going to grab my survey data. So in this case, I'm grabbing a DEM file. Bring that in. We're going to click terrain modeling, generate, and I'll create my contours at the same time. And there we are. We've got our topo surface, and I'm going to do my site design, and in this case, a pad on this surface. But regardless of whether we're designing a pad, a pit, a pond, etc., we require that DTM. Now with this, before I hand it back to Aaron, I'm going to just save this as its own terrain file, calling it terrain. And yeah, I'll pass it back to Aaron.
Awesome. Okay, let's get into that next step. That was really fast, by the way, Matt. Maybe we'll actually be on time today. Um, so for the actual site design side of things, it requires creation of features. So as you saw, Matt's created our DTM. That's going to be our original ground surface, and we're going to bring that into the background. So next, we're going to go and look at creating features to be able to do site design with. And I think it's really important to note that features inside of the terrain module have properties. And there's a bunch of different kind of properties, and a couple of them are really important to pay attention to. The first of which are terrain modeling properties. So these are key properties that are going to control what type of feature you've created, whether that feature is connected, so, as opposed to separate dots being connected and joined together, whether that feature has elevations, or if that property is turned off, maybe it's just draped on the model, whether it's a break line, and then whether it's also included in a terrain model itself, which is the modeled property. So in this next section we're going to go into, Matt will talk a little bit about some of these key properties for the terrain features as you create them. They are important to note. And then it's also worthwhile mentioning that there are additional properties you can set, whether those are visual ones, including the line type, symbology, hatching, that kind of stuff, as well as there's different attributes associated with different features. And this is just a quick snipping of some of the attributes for this particular feature, but there's lots of additional attributes you can set, as well as custom attributes. That part, both the visual and the attributes, are not going to be covered in today's webinar in any detail, but we certainly will talk a little bit about those terrain modeling properties. So pay attention to that once we get there. The other sort of key note before I pass it back to Matt here, again, is that original ground surface that we created. In order to do site design, our workflow is to put that surface into the background of our design surface. So you'll see him do that here in the next step. And again, that's a really, really important element, so that it can, be able to relate to it. So again, multiple terrain files needed for site design, and here's a quick sort of animation to really help bring that to light. So in terrain file number 1, we've got our original ground, and terrain number 2. So this is a totally separate terrain file with that original ground in the background. We create our design surface. And then from there, we're able to calculate volumes, which is obviously a really important part of site design. And the last kind of little note I had is talking about grading and direction. So when we create a feature and use the site design grading tool on it, that feature has a direction to it. And we need to be able to tell the software which side of this feature that we want to perform the grading on. Now, I'm highlighting a little bit of a new tool or new addition to version 12 to help demonstrate this concept. We're making it a little bit easier to help you determine which direction you want to grade on. So here, if I was grading to the left for the way this feature was created, it was drawn from the sort of top left corner down to the bottom and kind of around counterclockwise. It was created that way. And then the orientation, if I was to grade on that, saying left would make the grading go on the inside. Whereas in this case, I probably want my grading to go to the outside for this pad. So being aware that there is a direction to grading. And if you aren't quite sure which direction you should go in, save your file first before you do your grading. And that gives you a sort of a returning point if you need to. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Matt. We're going to look at simple grading, talk a little bit about that direction piece, talk a little bit about creating new features and some of those key properties that you need to be aware of when you do it. Matt, coming your way.
All right, so yeah, we have that topo surface that we just created the last time I had the screen. And we're going to do our site design in another instance of terrain. So we're going to reference this file that we've just saved. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to open a new version of terrain. I'm going to right click. I'm going to click plan options, and I'm going to add that in as a background. And I'm going to click zoom to extent so I can see where that other surface is. And the next few clicks aren't mandatory, but it is going to hopefully help add a little bit of context for what we have going on. I'm going to tile the plan view and my 3D view side by side. Now, with this, my 3D view right now is showing that other surface, just the contours for it. If I want to see my surface as a surface, I'm going to right click in my 3D options, and we're going to turn on the display triangles for that site design topo. And we're going to make that surface transparent or semi-transparent with our alpha channel. So there we've got just a little added context with the with that. Now for this, I am going to add in my pad geometry. So I'm going to go over to my home ribbon. I'm going to click new feature. I'll call it pad edge. So just giving it a name. Aaron introduced the concept of feature properties. So if I want this geometry to be displayed, I'm going to have my display property turned on. If I want the vertices that I click in, if I want those to be connected as a polyline, well, I'm going to keep connected on. And well, in this case, I want to have my elevation for these features set. And I want the elevation to help define my tin surface for this design surface. So modeled's turned on here. Now to start, I'm going to just draw in an arbitrary pad shape by hand. And so I'll hit OK here, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to just do a little bit of doodling. And I'm not going to make it super square or anything like that. We're going to talk about strategies to do that in a moment. But I've drawn that in, and well, we can see I've drawn in my geometry, and right now I'm not on the surface. So I'm going to just copy this for a second and delete it. So when I clicked this, I told it to set my elevation to start at 100. And I could have snapped to a feature if I wanted to, or drawn it in 3D if I wanted to use the geometry from my topo, but I didn't. I just kept it at that 100-meter elevation to start. So if I wanted to move that down, I could hover in my plan view, and I could see the elevation of my tin surface right underneath this feature is about 80. So I could come over here and I could say, well, let's shift that down to 80.5. We'll hit OK, and we can see it's dropped down in the 3D view. And before I do any grading, let's just model the surface here. I don't need to see my contours here. So we can see that mustard yellow is my surface for my current terrain, and the gray is the other. Now, of course, we're missing a key part to this pad, and that would be well, our cut or fill slopes. So with this geometry we have here, well, if I want to grade to the outside, I'm going to check my direction. So I'm going to come down to the bottom here. We've got the next point, and I can see, well, I'm going clockwise, so the outside of that's going to be at the left. Now, if I wanted to not click next and see the direction of this, I could also just throw it in as an arrow for my line type. But yeah, the idea is, well, if in this case I want to grade to the outside, which is the left. So I'm going to click grading. I'm going to tell it, well, these cut and fill slopes, I want it to target the other surface, that topo surface that we have created. So my graded features are going to go to the left. We're going to target our topo. We can set our, let's set our cut slope at 3:1 and our fill slope at 4:1. So the slope going up's at 3:1, down the negative 4:1. We're going to tell it to interpolate every, I don't know, let's go 2 meters. And we're going to turn those on. We'll hit OK. And we can see, well, we've got cut of almost 1,300 cubes, fill of 2,100 cubes. So we are, if we want this to balance, we are a little high. So if we want, we could run through and say, well, we're at 80.5. What happens if we go 80.2? So we've updated that. We can quickly redo our grading. Oops. I should have turned on calculate volumes while I had it open, but I can go calculate volumes and we can see, okay, how much do we have in between those? So we're getting close, but obviously it would be iterative if we wanted to really nail that down and get that to a refined elevation. Instead of manually chasing that up and down, let's switch to the auto balance function. And I'm going to turn this on here. But I'm going to tell it that I want this to net out at a 0 surplus. So I want my cuts and my fills to be equal. We'll hit OK. We'll hit OK. In the software, we can see it's moving things up and down. And we've got our balanced cuts and fills rather than chasing that around manually. So that is an introduction to the grading tool, obviously a core function as we work with site design in terrain. But before we add complexity, I'm going to pass it back to Erin for a bit and let her introduce some concepts.
Awesome. And you know what, Matt, there's one concept that just came through as a question in the chat that I think perhaps we should address before we move forward, which is, can you include swell factors in for cut and fill?
Totally. So yeah, with this auto balance functionality, I just left it at expansion factors of 1:1. So assuming no shrink or swell, but you can add that in here and the software will account for it while it calculates your balance. Another thing, since I did just kind of breeze through that, if we were in a situation where we didn't want to have a balanced cut and fill, maybe we were designing a pit, well, we could tell it we want a surplus of X cubic meters, and it would move that pit floor down until we develop as much as we like. Similarly, if you're designing maybe a spoil site, you could put in a negative surplus and tell it to give you the geometry that accounts for the volume that you've told it to. So hopefully that answers your question. Use it as an excuse to talk about one more thing. And with that, I'll pass it back to Erin.
Excellent. Okay, so before we go into our more complicated example, it's probably worthwhile mentioning a couple of the different tools that we can use to help with this feature creation. So in the last example, we watched Matt create it manually, a beautifully imperfect rectangle. So there are some tools that we can use to help us change and control the shape of our site. And those include being able to edit the coordinates. So this is sort of the tabular modification and input of geometry. It allows you to change the coordinates of a feature, and as well, you can also generate curves for it. So it supports a couple different formats. I believe Matt's going to probably focus on the survey format, but we also work in coordinate format here. So that's one of the tools. So being able to edit coordinates or tabular inputs. The next key tool that we're going to highlight in this next section is the buffer tool. So this basically takes an original reference feature and allows you to create a new feature by offsetting perpendicularly to that original one. And we can do this either through a circular buffer or a linear buffer. And of course, the circular buffer would create rounded corners. The other fun tools we are going to be focusing on: move, size, rotate, a little bit more self-evident with what it does. It's shifting, scaling, and rotating a selected set of features. And we can do that either with the mouse or by vectors. And then we've got another fun set of tools: break, join, close, all rather self-evident in their utility, but these allow you to, sort of edit by breaking, joining, or closing different features for the creation. And all of these tools, you can actually find them. They're up in the feature tools ribbon of Terrain. Lots of different items in there, even more than we're covering today. But these tools will allow you to start to edit and control what that geometry of the site design features that you're working with, what they look like. And with that very brief introduction, I'm going to pass it over to back to Matt, and we're going to go into a little bit more of a complicated grading. So here we're going to have a pad. It's going to have multiple parts, grades and crossfall. We're also going to look at fence features and explore some of those additional tools. So Matt, it is coming back your way.
All right. So I'm going to continue in the same file. I'm going to just delete what I have here, and we're going to continue along with kind of as though we started with a different strategy in mind. So rather than just doodling something in freehand, I'm going to create a new feature. Same process, create using a mouse often. It's usually just use that to place it in the right location, at least the right location to start. And well, if we knew we wanted this to be, say, 100 by, well, we could over here coordinates, we could change our actual coordinates to give it a specific X, Y, and Z at each vertices, or we could switch it to survey format, and we could say, well, let's go 50 north. Oops. Sorry, wrong. Add, and let's go 100 east. Add, so we could flush that out that way, and we could hit modify, close, and we've defined our geometry as a box. Now, we may not want that to be flat, and we may not know exactly what we want to work with, or maybe we don't want to have just that box. Maybe we want to have something with a crown on it. So instead, I may go over here, and I'll define my initial leg. And extending out, I'll probably, and usually, shift that down to be kind of right in the right ballpark for my elevation. So I'll shift this down to be 83-ish. And if I want to choose the grade manually here, I could click my profile button, and I could grab this guy and I could shift it down. And if we want to see our grade, we can turn on our grade when we do that. Now, we could go a hybrid approach instead, where we've drawn that line in plan view, and we say, well, I want it to only be 50 meters. I want it to be on a 4% slope. And then to account for that drop, if I treat it as a crown, I could take that feature, I could go modify, buffer. I could buffer to both sides. I'll go 25. Let's go 50. Or 30, sure, 30. And I'm going to buffer that out at, well, I'll go 2%. Now with this, I'm going to leave it as circular just to start. Usually I wouldn't do that. So we get that ring going around there. And in this case, I want something rectangular. So I'm going to go with the linear option here. And we see we've got those lines going out and they are not at the same elevation. So if I click there, my elevation is 81. If I click there, I'm 80.4. So the drop is being accounted for. Now, as I go to turn this into my pad geometry, I'm going to right click, edit insert points with mouse. I'm just going to snap those to the other features. And I'm going to click join. And we could, well, do the our grading. And for this, if I want to auto grade this, and if I want to move my crown up and down simultaneously with the boundary feature that I'm grading from, I'm going to have both of these selected. So one selected, two selected, and the feature that's being graded is my current feature. So my current feature is the one that the little red cross is showing up on. So the last one that gets selected in the process. So here I'll click optimization, auto balance, topo surface, and I'm going to grade to my right. So I did, rather than clicking the arrow key here, I just clicked Control N and Control B and checked that direction to see what way I had drawn it when I drew it. I'm going to set my B again 3:1 and 4:1. I'm going to tell it to interpolate and let this thing go. So we've got it all balanced out and we've got our pad that is on grade with a crossfall being applied. And it's balanced. We are, well, we're largely set. And there's, well, let's see, all sorts of different things we could do here if we want to well, move this thing. Kind of like the auto balance. We're going to select our features. And if I was doing this without doing a screen share, I'd hit Control M to move. But of course, I'm sharing my screen. So instead, I'll go up here to move size, rotate. We can pull this around and we can try to find a better spot for it. So if I'm happy with it there, we can run with it there. Of course, we could rotate it around that same way if we wanted to. We could have moved it by vector if we wanted to snap to a specific location. But we'll leave that there and we'll see how we shake out if it's a desirable spot or not for what we're looking to do. And there we are. So we've joined a feature as we connected those dots. We've moved it around. We've ran the buffering tool. We've put the buffering tool. We've used a grade when we've applied that. And if I was happy with this, and if I wanted to put together some documentation, well, we could certainly do that. And this is something that I'm kind of going about it a little different than kind of best practice. I've just kind of dove right into the design. Usually I'd switch my screen layout to match what I want right off the get-go. But yeah, so I'm gonna go up to my View tab. I'm going to retrieve a screen layout and so my screen layout here, got it set up so I can really quickly put together my documentation. I'm just gonna change my printer settings here, so that fits. But yeah, we can see we've got our plan view. We've got our 3D view. I probably want to see some cross sections in this if I want to really communicate what's going on. So I'm going to add a new feature. And this feature, I'm going to adjust those feature properties again. So I want it to be displayed. I want it to be connected. But the elevations, I don't want it to have its own elevations. Instead, I want to pull them in from the model. So here I'm going to turn elevations off. I'm going to give this feature a name so I don't get confused. And I'm going to click that in there. I'm going to click that in there. I'm going to go into my profile options. I'm going to set that so it uses that feature for my cross section. So we can see our section being displayed. If I want to adjust my line work, we can. So I'm going to make it a orange line. And let's make this a little larger here as we run through this. And if I want to do that in my profile, well, we do that in my profile too. So we've got our cross section being drawn in there. We can see our original ground as our background. So the topo is being displayed there. And if we wanted to change the line work for that, we could change it from being a black line, but I like that. And here it's showing me my grade from, well, start point to end point. And if I wanted this to lock in the geometry of the model that it's sitting on top of, I can turn elevations back on. We can see our cut and fill slopes. And here there happens to be an extra point up at the end. If we wanted to simplify this section feature that we're running with, we could simplify it to remove any extra vertices. So we've got a section. I'm going to do the same for another section. And we'll go across the back here so it's a little more interesting. So we can see that. We can see our crown. Same thing, elevations on, then we're going to turn it off, or elevations on, and then we are going to just simplify it to avoid reporting more slopes than we'd like. And we'll move our various views around if we want to move our views around. And let's not go quite as exaggerated. And I'm just moving that with Shift and the arrow keys, and away we go. So we've got a document together very quickly. 3D view, I'll position that so I can get a good look at what I want to focus on. And we're set. Now, if I want to take this out for staking, we get it save as, and we could export this design as a land XML, and we could add pad geometry for staking. Yeah, so that's kind of a pad design with a little bit more geometry in there, highlighting a few different tools to get there. And of course, one thing that I will mention is my multi-plot here was something that was saved with my screen layout, which makes it really easy to produce your documentation. We can build something out from scratch if we'd like as well. So it would be just a matter of clicking multi-plot, new, and we could add those views in and build out our document from manually. And once we've done it once, we could save that as a screen layout and bring it in on a future project so we don't have to do it over and over again. And with that, I'll pass it back to Aaron, and yeah.
Perfect. Okay, let me get my screen up. Awesome. So our last sort of content section of the webinar is really going to focus on exploring some additional tools. So we've kind of gone through the workflow here 2 times, one for a simple pad site design, and for a secondary one that was a little bit more detailed. So now we're just going to diverge from this particular example and go in and take a look at break lines, interpolating slope spacing, calculating intersecting features, merging terrains, and I'm sure Matt's going to tuck a few more items in there. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Matt. And yeah, we can take a look at some additional tools to explore the tool belt.
All right. So let's just tile these side by side. We're going to minimize some of this stuff. And I'm going to get rid of those section lines because I'm going to really just focus on the 3D view more than anything else here. So break lines, I added in my crown as a break line here. And with that, what the break line's doing is it's not allowing any triangle edges to cross our line. So if we stretch this out and make it a little more pronounced, a little more extreme, well, we can see that crown is a little easier to see. And if we had to turn this off and remodel it, darn, it doesn't do it because it's, let's add another one in to force it to do what I, without a break line there, we run the risk of a triangle edge crossing that feature. So here, theoretically, if that wasn't set as a break line, we could have triangles that define our surface go underneath that. So I used a break line to set my crown. Now that's not the only spot that the break line property comes up. These slope lines, I turned on, well, a break line to them. And where that was done was in the slope lines text. So here, I told it to apply break lines. So well, it may have happened here. Down at the bottom, we don't have triangle interpolation going, say from that point to that point. Now, another option that is in this dialog that's worth talking about is this interpolate spacing. So if I had had that turned off and I ran my grading functionality, we get a pretty undesirable surface. And so what we can see is the grading tool is applying grading at the vertices that are applied from. But between those vertices, we lose out on the detail of our surface. So the interpolate option is something you want to be cognizant of, and we'll include that. Now, another thing that we have, I'm going to just run that with interpolate on, is the tin boundary property. So here, let's look at it along this edge. So here with that outline being set as a tin boundary feature, my surface isn't being interpolated from, say, here over to here. And if we had have turned that off, so if I had have run that without set daylight to tin boundary, we can see we've got these funny triangulations going outside of the project extents. So usually we want to be cognizant of cognizant of those settings that oftentimes if I'm just running it, I won't think anything of it. I'll just use what makes sense. But there are a few knobs that are useful to be aware of in there. Now another kind of option that may not be super obvious is, well, what if we wanted to have this geometry, but we only wanted to have our geometry where the pads and fill. So if we wanted to butt up against something, but we didn't want to do any of that excavation, well, we could see where that intersects that other surface. But if we wanted to generate a feature for it, well, we totally can. So if I wanted to have that just in fill and I wanted to have a line to help me break that out of fill, well, we could go up here, calculate volumes, surface intersections. I'm going to calculate this intersection. And there we are. We have that line coming across the face. So if I wanted to get rid of all that stuff that is, well, in cut, I can select that, modify, break, add current feature. I'm going to just take that guy there. Oops. I'm going to break it at its end. And do same with this. And select both of those. Modify, join. And I'm going to get rid of everything outside of that feature. So select by name, by boundary, outside. And now we're going to oh, I've got the wrong button set. There we go. Yeah, want it to be a tin boundary, not a negative. And there we are. So now we've just clipped that where we intersect that other surface. Of course, I've shown it in the example where we're intersecting that with the topo, but it's a useful tool if you're dealing with really complex surfaces and kind of marrying several surfaces together. Calculating that intersection point and being able to generate a feature from it is useful. And then the other example, and I'll just do something simple for this one, is, well, what if I was considering it kind of from a construction staging standpoint? Maybe we design one pad and we plan to expand on it. Well, I'm going to I'm going to create a rectangular pad, and an excuse to use a different tool. If I want to just take a diagonal and turn it into a shape like a rectangle, we can. And I'm going to shift that down to be handy. So we'll go 74. And we'll do our grading off of this one. So if that was my pad, I'm going to call it pad phase 1. And I wanted to, well, maybe build that 1 year and then come back in here and build out from it later on. But I wanted to account for, well, the surface following year 1 construction. we could do a merge. So for that, I'm going to create what we refer to as a composite surface. So in my topo, I'm going to first change the name, topo with P1. Then I'm going to go to terrain modeling. I'm going to click merge terrain. I'm going to browse to that pad terrain file that we have created. I'm going to zoom in here so I can see I've got all my LiDAR points outside of it and I've got all my pad points inside of it. So we can see that composite surface. And if we wanted to do a design accounting for both of those surfaces together, well, we can, and it's just the same process. So right click, plan options, we're going to add that merge surface in. We're going to zoom to extents, and I'll just, I won't worry about necessarily doing something that makes sense. I will focus on doing something that kind of illustrates the concept though. So here, if I wanted to see, well, let's make sure my fills onto my pad where it should fill onto the pad and fills onto the topo where it should fill onto the topo. Grading. Oops. And we can see I went the wrong direction with it. And there we are. So a couple extra tools and strategies that are certainly useful when you need them. But yeah, all those kind of different tools we have for modifying our features, grading, all the different settings really result in something that's quite flexible to give you your geometry that you'd like to create, but also straightforward in how they work. So with that, I'll pass it back to Aaron.
Perfect. Okay, I am going to give a little bit of a public service announcement. So we talked a lot about different types of site design. One fun kind of topic that we do have is that you can actually, for projects, say like a wind farm pad design or perhaps like a forestry landing design, you can actually include the earthworks for those pads along with the optimization of the earthworks for a road. And this is a little bit of a different workflow. So I did want to highlight, we are going to be talking about that workflow and demonstrating, particularly for the case of wind farms, but wind farm pad design and optimization, again, applicable to forestry landings, same kind of workflow. So yes, that's coming up in, oh my goodness, July. I can't believe we're talking about a webinar in July, but a couple months from now, we're going to be talking about that. So be sure to, make a note, register if you're interested in learning more about that topic. And with that, Matt, let's tackle some questions. As predicted, we are over time, but let's do it anyways. So the first question we have here is talking a little bit about multi-plot and just trying to understand how you can create two different multi-plots within the terrain file. And for that, I will pass it back to you.
All right.
I guess while you're getting your screen organized, probably important to note, terrain multiplot is a little bit different than our location module multiplot. So location is set up for multiple pages, different layouts, whereas terrain, as you're going to see here with Matt, is single page focused, but we'll give you a quick workflow for how you can do a couple different pages.
Yeah. So with this, I've deleted my fence features for my profile there and kind of completely changed my geometry. So, but yeah, with this terrain, the multi-plot is kind of attributed to a page. Whereas if you compare it to location, location will follow your alignment and you have sections and planned over profile, etc. With this, where kind of it's uh, there's not necessarily a geometry to follow like there is for a road. We tackle that by having well, kind of the same entity, several different screen layouts that you can pull from. So you can have the same design file and change your screen layout to suit what you have saved for your documentation that you'd like to use to highlight different things if there's different entities or different things that you'd like to call out for different pages. So with that, it's just a matter of switching screen layouts to something that you'd like to highlight something else. And I don't think I have anything super pertinent to a pad design here to switch to. But yeah, that really is all it is, just a matter of opening up another screen layout that has the format applied to show what you'd like for that separate entity.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Our next question is, can you find the optimum area and rotation for something like a pad within a given larger area? And what's that workflow look like?
Yeah, so um, with the auto balance, it is just moving things up and down. So to search for that within a given area, you are using that move, size, rotate. Well, I guess you're not sizing it, but you're moving it around manually, and you can iteratively run through the auto balance at each given location that you decide to explore. Um, yeah, and same with the rotation. The auto balance isn't automatically rotating that for you. Yeah, but both of those things you may see happen as a software function in the future.
Excellent. Okay, let's do one more. I think this is a particularly good question. So in the case of needing to add a road to my site design, do I need to make a merged file? So I guess they're asking if they need to merge their site design into their original ground before going into location. Maybe
No.
you could talk a little bit about what that looks like for us, Matt.
All right. And yeah, I guess I probably should have anticipated that one coming up. Um, so the need to use a merged surface is really kind of a terrain specific thing. Let me just open my topo here. All right. So I've got my location file, blank location file set up. And if I want to account for that other pad in my road design, so that other surface, I should say, it doesn't have to just be a pad. I can go up to reference surfaces. I can click terrain and I can say, well, I want to bring in that pad phase one terrain. And with that, well, I can see it's going to show up as a cyan line, provided that I show it. And if I knew I would incorporate that in my surface, I'd turn on this merged into topo surface checkbox right off the bat. I'm not going to do that here, though, just so I can kind of explain what's going on. So if I want to see that surface that we've added in, profile options, we can come down here, we can turn on, well, I want to see that reference surface. And now we can see it in the little blue line here. Now with that, and I can do the same in my section view. See, my fill slope's still going up to that original ground. So if I had of set this to merge into topo surface, well, now I can see that that's merged into my topo surface, and the two files are independent files. Names are being calculated relative to the merged surface. Yeah, so a bit different in location, and it's nice thing to keep them separate. If you move one thing, everything's nice and dynamic for you. So hopefully that answers the question and make.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And I think we'll probably wrap up there. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming to today's webinar. There has been a request to get some of the associated survey data files for practicing with the webinar, so we will be sure to include those to the best of our ability in the follow-up email that'll come out sometime either today or tomorrow. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to us, support.team@softry.com. We're happy to help you. And with that, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.